The grand hall of the Zephyrian Empire's palace was filled with tension. The golden pillars stretched high into the sky, reflecting the glow of the twin suns outside. Hundreds of noble warriors, diplomats, and advisors stood in stunned silence. They could not believe what they had just heard. King Vorthan, ruler of the mighty Zephyrian Empire, had spoken. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "My daughters shall marry a human." The words echoed through the chamber. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some gasped, others murmured in disbelief. The Zephyrians were a proud and powerful race, known for their strength, intelligence, and dominance over many star systems. Humans, in their eyes, were weak and primitive. To mix their royal bloodline with such a species was unthinkable. The three princesses stood beside their father, each reacting differently to the decree. Princess Xyra, the eldest, clenched her fists. A warrior and military commander, she had led countless battles, proving herself on the battlefield. To be forced into marriage with a human was an insult to her strength. Princess Lyra, the second daughter, remained calm but uneasy. She was gifted with foresight and wisdom, often experiencing strange visions of the future. But this was something she had not seen coming. She closed her eyes, trying to sense if this decree would bring salvation or disaster. Princess Seraphis, the youngest, wore a polite smile, though her mind raced with political calculations. She was the most diplomatic of the three, skilled in negotiations and courtly intrigue. A marriage to a human could be a dangerous gamble, but perhaps, with the right strategy, she could turn it to her advantage. Before anyone could speak, Lord Vasher, one of the king's most trusted advisors, stepped forward. His expression was serious. "Your Majesty, this is highly unusual," he said carefully. "A human is far below the status of a Zephyrian royal. Why would you make such a decree?" King Vorthan's sharp gaze swept over the crowd. He leaned forward on his throne, his deep voice commanding attention. "Because the Empire is at a breaking point." Silence fell once more. The noble houses fight among themselves. Enemies gather at our borders, sensing weakness, and within our own court, traitors whisper in the shadows. If we do not act now, the Empire will crumble. A new ruler must rise, one who is strong, but also different from the past kings. A leader who can bring change. His piercing eyes met those of his daughters. The prophecy of the stars speaks of an outsider, one who will unite the broken throne. I believe that outsider is a human. Gasps filled the room again. The prophecy of the stars was an ancient legend, believed by many but ignored by most. It spoke of a time when the empire would face great turmoil, and only a ruler from beyond the Zephyrian bloodline could bring balance. Some nobles scoffed, others looked uncertain. A few exchanged nervous glances. Then a voice rang out, full of defiance. "This is madness." All eyes turned to General Krovax, a veteran warrior, and one of the most powerful nobles in the empire. His golden armor gleamed under the palace lights as he stepped forward. "You expect us to believe that a weak human will save our empire, that they are worthy of standing beside your daughters?" He shook his head. "This is an insult to our honor." The king's gaze hardened. "You doubt my decision, General." Krovax hesitated, but only for a moment. "With respect, Your Majesty, I do." King Vorthan's expression remained unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "Then let the human prove himself." The room fell silent once more. The king turned to his royal guard. "Bring him in." The massive doors of the throne room swung open. Heavy boots echoed against the polished floor as Commander Elias Drake entered. He was not what the court expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a crisp military uniform, Elias walked with confidence. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, reading every expression, every movement. His presence was strong, not like a desperate man seeking power, but like a warrior who had already survived countless battles. He stopped before the throne and saluted the king. "Commander Elias Drake, reporting. As ordered. Many in the crowd whispered. So this was the human. He did not look weak. He did not look afraid. The king studied him for a moment before speaking. You have been chosen for a great task, Commander Drake. My decree stands. You will marry my daughters and secure the future of the Xipherian Empire. Elias raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, Your Majesty, I don't recall agreeing to that. Gasps filled the chamber. A mere human, challenging the king's command. But instead of anger, King Vorthin chuckled. Then tell me, human, what would make you accept? Elias met the king's gaze without flinching. He had faced death, war, and impossible odds before. He wasn't about to be pushed into anything without a fight. Let me prove my worth, he said. If I am to stand beside your daughters, I will earn it. Let me face whatever challenges you believe will test me. The king's smile widened. Very well. You shall face the trial of worth. The chamber erupted into whispers once more. The trial of worth was an ancient test, one designed to push warriors to their absolute limits. No human had ever attempted it. Zyra smirked. He won't last a day. Lyra frowned, unsure. This was not in my visions. Seraphis watched Elias closely, intrigued. Interesting. Elias simply nodded. Then let's begin. And so, the fate of the Xipherian Empire, and the human who dared to challenge it, was set into motion. The air in the royal chamber was thick with tension. The moment Commander Elias Drake left the throne room, the three princesses turned toward their father, their emotions barely contained. Princess Zyra, the warrior, spoke first. Her violet eyes burned with fury as she stepped forward, her armored boots echoing against the marble floor. You cannot be serious, father, a human. You want me to stand beside a weak creature from an insignificant world. King Vorthin's expression remained calm. You judge too quickly, Zyra. The trial of worth will decide if he is truly weak. Zyra clenched her fists. It is an insult to my honor. Before the king could respond, Princess Lyra sighed, brushing her fingers over the golden rings she wore. Unlike her older sister, she did not radiate anger. Her expression was troubled, uncertain. I did not see this in my visions, she murmured. The future is shifting in strange ways. Her words made the court uneasy. Lyra's foresight was legendary. If she had not foreseen this, it meant something unpredictable, perhaps even dangerous, was happening. Princess Seraphis, the youngest and most cunning, simply smiled. Her emerald eyes gleamed with curiosity. Perhaps this is not as foolish as it seems, she said. A human may be different, but difference is not always weakness. Sarah scoffed. You only say that because you see a political advantage. Seraphis chuckled. And you only oppose it because of your pride. Zyra glared at her younger sister but said nothing. King Vorthin finally stood from his throne, his towering figure casting a shadow over them. Enough. His voice silenced the room. The decision has been made. The human will take the trial of worth. If he succeeds, you will accept this marriage. If he fails, you will have nothing to fear. Zyra exhaled sharply but nodded. Then I will watch him fail. Lyra, still deep in thought, bowed her head. I will wait and see. Seraphis merely smirked. I look forward to being surprised. The first meeting. Later that evening, Commander Elias Drake was summoned to meet the princesses in private. A grand chamber awaited him. Golden walls lined with ancient artifacts, shimmering blue fire in the floating lanterns, and a long crystal table in the center. As he entered, Zyra was already standing with her arms crossed, waiting like a soldier preparing for battle. Lyra sat quietly, observing. Seraphis leaned against the wall, clearly amused by the situation. Elias stopped a few steps inside and looked at them. Then, with the confidence of a man who had been through worse situations, he gave a small nod. So, you're my future wives. Zyra growled. You are not my husband yet, human. Elias smirked slightly. Fair enough. But if I pass this trial of worth, then what? Lyra studied him carefully. That depends on what kind of man you truly are. Seraphis tilted her head. Tell me, Commander Drake, why did you accept the king's decree? Why not refuse? Elias leaned against the nearest pillar and crossed his arms. Because I don't like being told what I can or can't do. Everyone in that throne room looked at me like I was nothing. I intend to prove them wrong. Zira narrowed her eyes. You think you can prove yourself worthy of a Xipherian princess? Elias met her gaze without fear. I don't need to prove anything to you. I'll take the trial, and we'll see what happens. For the first time, Zira hesitated. Most men would try to flatter her, to convince her of their strength. But Elias did not beg for approval. He simply stood his ground. Lyra tapped her fingers on the table. The trial is dangerous, you know. Few survive it. Elias shrugged. Then it's a good thing I don't die easily. Seraphis chuckled. I must admit, I'm starting to like you. Zira sighed in frustration. This is a waste of time. Let's see if you actually survive before we start talking. She turned and left the chamber without another word. Lyra stood as well, glancing at Elias one last time. Be careful, human. Fate is watching you closely. Then she followed after her sister. Only Seraphis remained. She walked toward Elias, circling him slowly, as if studying him like a puzzle. You are an interesting man, Commander Drake. Elias raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? Seraphis smiled. It's an observation. She stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. I do not know if you will win this trial, but if you do, you may find that I am the least of your problems. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Elias alone in the chamber. Elias exhaled and shook his head. This is going to be fun. The trial awaits. Outside, in the massive arena of the palace, warriors and nobles gathered. The trial of worth would begin soon, and all of Xipherion would be watching. In the shadows, enemies of the throne whispered among themselves. If the human succeeds, it will change everything. He must not be allowed to win. Unaware of the plots forming against him, Elias stood on the balcony of his chamber, staring at the stars. He had faced impossible challenges before. He had survived wars, betrayals, and the cruelty of the universe. He would survive this too. And if he did, then the galaxy would learn that humanity was not to be underestimated. The trial of worth was about to begin. The grand arena of the Xipherian Empire roared with anticipation. Thousands of spectators gathered in the towering stands, eager to witness a spectacle they never thought possible, a human attempting the trial of worth. Warriors, nobles, and scholars filled the air with murmurs of disbelief. He will not last 5 minutes, one noble sneered. The trial is brutal. No human could survive it, another muttered. At the center of the arena stood Commander Elias Drake. The twin sons of Xipherion cast a golden glow over the battlefield, but Elias didn't flinch. He had faced worse odds before. He was not afraid. On a high balcony overlooking the arena, King Vorthan and his daughters watched in silence. Princess Zira, clad in her warrior's armor, leaned forward. Her sharp eyes studied Elias carefully. She wanted him to fail, not because she hated him, but because she refused to believe a human could be her equal. Princess Lyra, quiet as always, had a strange look in her eyes. She felt something unusual about this moment. Her visions had never shown her this trial. What did it mean? Princess Seraphis, however, smirked slightly. She loved surprises. King Vorthan raised his hand, and the arena fell silent. His voice echoed across the Colosseum. Commander Elias Drake, you stand before the Empire to prove your worth. If you survive the 3 trials, you will be recognized as an equal to the royal house. If you fail, the king's voice lowered, you will not leave this arena alive. Elias smirked. Sounds fair. A drumbeat thundered through the arena. The trial of worth had begun. Trial 1. The Arena of Blades. The first test was simple. Survive. The ground trembled as a set of heavy doors opened, and 6 armored warriors emerged. These were Sci-Fi champions, trained in battle since childhood. Each one wielded a blade made of Sci-Fi steel, a metal stronger than anything found on Earth. The crowd cheered wildly. They had seen these warriors crush alien champions, slay monstrous beasts, and win battles against impossible odds. And now, they would face a single human. Elias rolled his shoulders. All right, let's dance. The warriors charge. Elias moved fast, faster than they expected. He dodged the first sword strike, ducked under a second, and countered with a brutal kick to a warrior's knee. The Sci-Fi fell, stunned. The crowd gasped. A human had struck a Sci-Fi warrior. Zira narrowed her eyes. He's faster than I expected. Seraphis chuckled. Interesting. The remaining warriors attacked in unison, trying to overwhelm Elias. But humans fought differently. Zephyrians were used to warriors who relied on brute strength. Elias was smarter. He used their own size against them, weaving between their attacks. One warrior swung too hard. Elias dodged, grabbed his arm, and flipped him over his shoulder. The warrior crashed into the sand. Another warrior lunged with a downward strike. Elias sidestepped and slammed his elbow into the warrior's ribs. A loud crack echoed across the arena. The last warrior hesitated. A mistake. Elias grabbed a fallen sword and held it to the warrior's throat. The battle was over. The arena was silent. Then the king spoke. The first trial is complete. The crowd erupted into cheers, not all of them happy. Some were impressed, others were furious. But no one could deny it. The human had won. Trial 2. The Labyrinth of Shadows. The second trial was not about strength, it was about the mind. Elias was led into a dark labyrinth, filled with shifting corridors and strange illusions. Sci-Fi warriors could only pass this trial by using their heightened senses. Elias, however, had only his instincts. Lyra watched carefully from the balcony. No human has ever entered the labyrinth and returned, she whispered. Inside the darkness, Elias moved carefully. The walls shifted around him, creating illusions of impossible paths. Ghostly voices whispered lies. You are alone. You will fail. You are weak. Elias clenched his fists. I've heard worse. His mind was sharp. He ignored the whispers, trusted his instincts, and moved forward. Step by step, he defied the labyrinth's tricks. Hours passed. The crowd grew restless. Then, finally, he emerged. Lyra gasped. Impossible. The king nodded. The second trial is complete. Elias smirked. That all you got? Trial 3. The Gauntlet of Beasts. The final test was the deadliest. A massive gate opened, and the arena trembled. From the darkness, a beast of nightmares emerged. A Sci-Fi war beast, a creature bred for destruction. It stood 20 feet tall, with armored scales and razor-sharp claws. Its eyes burned with fury. The crowd held their breath. Elias exhaled. Of course, it's a giant monster. The war beast charged. Elias barely dodged as its claws tore through the ground. The beast roared, shaking the very air. He had no weapons, no armor, just his mind. Then he saw it, a weak spot near its neck. The beast lunged again. Elias waited. At the last moment, he dodged and grabbed a broken spear from the ground. The moment the beast turned, Elias struck. The spear pierced its weak spot. The beast roared in pain, stumbling. Elias climbed onto its back and drove the weapon deeper. With a final, deafening cry, the war beast collapsed. The arena exploded into cheers. Elias stood over the fallen beast, breathing heavily. The king rose from his throne. The final trial is complete. Silence. Then, the king spoke again. The human has proven his worth. Zaira stared in disbelief. Lyra was speechless. Seraphis only grinned. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and looked up at the royal balcony. His voice was steady, confident. "So, when's the wedding?" The crowd erupted once more. The human had won, and the Empire would never be the same again. The arena was still buzzing with excitement long after Commander Elias Drake had won the trial of worth. Many could not believe what they had witnessed. A human had defeated the best warriors, outsmarted the labyrinth, and slain a Xipherian warbeast. Some cheered his name. Others whispered in disbelief. But one thing was clear: Elias was no ordinary human. The royal decree. Back in the Grand Palace, Cain Vorthan stood before his daughters. The massive throne room was silent except for the flickering sound of golden torches along the walls. The king's voice was calm but firm. "The human has proven himself. The decree stands. You will honor your word." Princess Zaira clenched her fists. "This is madness." She turned to Elias, who stood with his arms crossed. "You got lucky in the trials. That does not mean you are worthy of a Xipherian princess." Elias smirked slightly. "Sounds like someone's making excuses." Zaira's eyes burned with frustration, but before she could respond, Princess Lyra stepped forward. Her silver blue eyes studied Elias carefully. "I did not see this future, yet it has come to pass. That intrigues me." She turned to her father and nodded. "I will follow the decree." Princess Seraphis, always the most mysterious, chuckled. "I never had a problem with it." She looked at Elias with curiosity. "In fact, I find him fascinating." Zaira gritted her teeth but finally sighed. "Fine, but I will never see him as my equal." Cain Vorthan nodded. "Then it is decided. The human will be your husband." Elias faces the princesses. Later that evening, Elias sat in a grand chamber surrounded by his 3 alien brides. A long crystal table was set with exotic food, glowing drinks, and golden plates. The silence was heavy. Zaira leaned back, arms crossed. "I still don't understand how a human won." Elias smirked. "Maybe I'm just better than you thought." Zaira narrowed her eyes. "Don't push your luck." Lyra sighed, sipping her drink. "It does not matter how. It has happened. We must now decide what this marriage means." Elias nodded. "Agreed. Let's be real. I didn't come here expecting to marry 3 alien princesses, but I don't run from challenges. If we're doing this, I want it to mean something." Seraphis smiled. "Bold words, human. But tell me, what do you want from us?" Elias leaned forward. "Simple. We don't have to like each other right away, but we do have to work together. Xipherian and humanity are different, but that doesn't mean we can't be stronger together." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "An alliance through marriage. It is not unheard of." Zaira huffed. "I do not trust easily." Elias met her gaze. "Then I'll earn it." The warrior princess stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, she gave a small nod. Seraphis clapped her hands. "Well, this will be fun." The shadows of betrayal. Far from the palace, in the dark alleys of the capital, a group of Xipherian nobles gathered in secret. Their faces were hidden beneath cloaks, their voices filled with anger. "A human, sharing the royal bloodline." One hissed, "This is an insult to our people." Another noble slammed his fist on the table. "The king has made a mistake. This alliance must not be allowed." A third noble, his voice calm but dangerous, spoke. "Then we must act before it is too late." The others leaned in. "What do you propose?" The noble's eyes gleamed. "We remove the human. Quietly. Permanently." In the palace, Elias had no idea that enemies were already plotting his downfall. His greatest challenge was yet to come. The grand celebration had ended, but the challenges for Elias Drake had only just begun. The Xipherian Empire had been thrown into a whirlwind of change. For the first time in its history, a human had been married to its royal family. not just one princess, but three. The ripple effects of this unprecedented union were felt throughout the entire empire, adjusting to royal life. In the days following the wedding, Elias had been introduced to the realities of his new life. He had expected to face challenges, but the weight of royalty was something else entirely. The royal palace, once a place he had only dreamed of entering as a visitor, was now his home. Endless corridors filled with marble statues and tapestries, towering walls decorated with ancient Zephyrian history, and rooms that seemed to go on forever. He had to adjust quickly to this new world. However, despite the grandeur of it all, Elias felt a sense of isolation. While he had earned the respect of the Zephyrian people through the trials, he was still an outsider. He was human, and no matter how much the empire had changed, it wasn't easy for some to accept him fully. Princess Xyra had made her feelings clear from the start. She had no interest in pretending to like him. Even though the wedding ceremony had passed, she made little effort to hide her discomfort with the situation. The respect he had earned through the trials was not enough to win her over. Princess Lyra, however, had been more understanding. She spent time with him, explaining the ways of the Zephyrians, helping him learn their customs, and guiding him through the palace's many intricacies. She was a calming presence, a quiet strength that helped Elias feel like he was not completely out of place. Princess Seraphis was playful and unpredictable, often dragging Elias into spontaneous adventures or entertaining him with her mischievous jokes. Her approach to their marriage was lighthearted, and it seemed as though she enjoyed the idea of having him by her side, if only to make life a bit more interesting. The council's concerns. Not everyone in the empire was as accepting of the union as the royal family was. The Council of Zephyrian Lords, a powerful assembly that advised the king, had expressed their concerns behind closed doors. While King Vorthan had made his decision, many of the council members still saw Elias as a foreigner, someone unworthy of marrying the princesses, no matter his strength or bravery. Lord Kale, one of the most influential council members, was the loudest in his objections. How can we allow this human to hold such power? He had argued during a private meeting. Our traditions are centuries old. How can we accept this as the new way? The king's voice had been firm and unwavering in response. Elias Drake has proven his worth. The empire has always adapted to new challenges. This is no different. But the arguments continued, and Elias could feel the tension in the air every time he passed by the council chambers. There were whispers, lingering looks, and murmurs of doubt. Would the people accept him? Could he prove that his marriage to the royal family was more than just a passing moment in history, a growing bond? Despite the skepticism surrounding his marriage, Elias grew closer to his wives. The time they spent together became the foundation of their relationship, a journey that would change the course of the empire forever. One evening, as they gathered in the royal gardens under the soft light of the twin moons, Elias found himself talking with Lyra about his home world. The conversation was relaxed, yet there was a sense of curiosity in the air as she asked him about Earth. "Tell me more about your people," Lyra asked, her silver-blue eyes sparkling with interest. Elias smiled. "We're not much different from you. We fight wars, we explore, we make mistakes, but we try to do good." He paused, wondering if that would even make sense to someone like her. "We have a lot to learn, but we keep pushing forward." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "You remind me of Zephyrian history. Our people have fought many wars, and we've made mistakes too. But we always find a way to rise." Elias met her gaze. "I think that's what makes us similar." As they continued to talk, the tension between them softened, and Elias felt a deep sense of connection to Lyra, one that went beyond their royal titles. She was his partner in every sense of the word. She had helped him understand this world, and in return, Elias had begun to understand her. Unexpected challenges. However, it wasn't just the council that was a challenge. Tyra continued to test him at every turn. One afternoon, after a particularly heated training session with the Royal Guard, Syra approached Elias in the palace courtyard. "You think this is easy, don't you?" she said, her golden eyes sharp with disdain. "You passed the trials, but you're still nothing more than a human." Elias stood tall, his voice steady. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm here now, and I won't back down." Syra scoffed, turning away. "You think you can just walk in here and be one of us? You'll never truly understand what it means to be Zephyrian." Elias took a deep breath, realizing this was not something he could fix overnight. "I don't need to be Zephyrian," he said quietly. "I just need to be the best partner I can be." For a moment, Syra was silent, her back still turned. Then, without a word, she walked away, leaving Elias to reflect on the challenges ahead. It was clear that winning Syra's trust would take time, but Elias was determined to prove himself. The future of the empire. Despite the doubts and obstacles, Elias knew one thing for certain. He had a place in this empire. His marriage to the princesses was more than just an alliance. It was a new beginning for both Earth and Zephyrian. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with resistance, misunderstandings, and growing pains, but Elias was ready to face whatever came his way. The Zephyrian Empire was a land of history, power, and tradition. But now, with a human at the heart of its royal family, change was inevitable. And that change was something Elias was ready to embrace, alongside his wives and the future they would build together. The empire's future was no longer bound by tradition alone. It was bound by the strength of unity, the power of partnership, and the hope of a better tomorrow. The days following the royal wedding felt like a whirlwind for Elias Drake. The Zephyrian Empire had been shaken by the union of a human and the royal family. But as much as things had changed, they were still filled with challenges. The wedding was not just a celebration of love. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Elias and the empire. And that new chapter was not without its difficulties. The tension of expectations. The royal palace had become a place where Elias felt both included and isolated. He had expected to be an outsider, but he hadn't realized how much of a constant struggle it would be. There were times when he would walk through the palace halls and see the stares of the Zephyrian nobles, whispers following him wherever he went. The council continued to express their doubts, though their words were hidden behind polite smiles. But it wasn't just the nobility. Even the royal guard, the proud and ancient warriors of Zephyrian, looked at him with skepticism. He had earned their respect in the trials, but many still wondered if a human could ever truly belong. Commander Torin, the head of the royal guard, had been especially distant, not wanting to show anything less than professionalism in his dealings with Elias. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions with the Zephyrian council, Elias found himself walking alone through the palace garden. The moonlight shone down on the lush greenery, and the sound of flowing water from a nearby fountain created a calm atmosphere. It was a rare moment of peace. Just as he was about to sit on a stone bench, Princess Syra appeared from the shadows, her silhouette tall and strong in the dim light. She had always been the most distant of his wives, and their conversations had often been strained. "I don't understand why you're still here," Syra said abruptly, her voice cold as ever. Elias stood and turned toward her. "I'm here because of the king's decree. I'm here because I made a promise to your father. But most importantly, I'm here because I want to try." Syra shook her head. "Try what?" "To fit in. To become like us. You will never understand our ways. You will always be a foreigner." Elias felt a sharp pang of frustration, but kept his voice calm. "Maybe I will never be Zephyrian, but I will do my best to learn, and I will stand by you all. That's the only promise I can make." Syra's eyes softened, but her expression remained guarded. "Words are easy, Elias. Actions speak louder." Before Elias could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the garden, his heart heavy with the realization that gaining her trust would take far more than just his words. It would take time, patience, and actions that proved his worth. The strain of leadership, The Xipherian Council had always been a powerful force in the Empire. While Cain Vorthan had granted Elias a seat among them, the councillors continued to question his ability to lead. Every decision Elias made was scrutinized, and the weight of their doubts bore down on him like a constant storm. One day, during a particularly tense meeting, Lord Kale, a high-ranking council member who had been vocal about his opposition to Elias' marriage to the princesses, stood up and addressed the room. This human has proven his strength in battle, but what about his ability to lead? Lord Kale's voice was sharp. Our empire is built on ancient traditions, and this marriage was a mere distraction. What of our future? Elias looked across the room, feeling the eyes of the council members on him. His fists clenched, but he knew he had to keep calm. This was a battle of words, not fists. He had to prove his worth, not just through action, but through his mind. The strength of an empire, Elias began, his voice steady, doesn't lie only in its history or its traditions. It lies in its ability to adapt. Xipherion has faced challenges before, and it will face challenges again. But we must learn to grow, together. The world is changing, and so must we. Lord Kale scowled but did not speak further. The room fell silent, and Elias took a deep breath, feeling a sense of quiet victory. He may not have convinced them all, but he had at least made his point. An unlikely ally. After the tense council meeting, Elias found himself walking the palace halls, his thoughts heavy. It seemed like no matter what he did, he was always fighting an uphill battle. He had earned his place in the Empire's history, but gaining acceptance, especially from those closest to the throne, was another challenge entirely. As he passed one of the royal gardens, he was surprised to see Princess Seraphis sitting on a stone bench, laughing softly to herself as she watched the stars above. "You look deep in thought," Elias said, approaching her. Seraphis turned, her mischievous smile brightening her face. "I was thinking about how much trouble you're in," she teased. Elias chuckled despite himself. "I think that's an understatement." Seraphis patted the empty space beside her. "Come sit with me. You look like you could use some company." Elias sat down, his muscles still tense from the earlier meeting. "Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to be enough for them." Seraphis raised an eyebrow. "For whom?" "For the council, for Xyra, for all of Xipherion." Elias ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm a human. I'll never truly fit in." Seraphis looked at him, her eyes gentle for the first time. "You'll never be Xipherion, Elias, but that doesn't mean you're not enough. You've already proven that you have the strength, the courage, and the heart to lead. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within him. "You really think so?" Seraphis nodded. "I do. And I think, in time, others will see it too." Elias felt a warmth spread through him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he could belong here, not as a human, but as someone with the strength to lead and the courage to make a difference. The road ahead, the road to acceptance, was still long, and Elias knew that many battles lay ahead. But with Princess Lyra by his side, guiding him through the complexities of Xipherian culture, and Princess Seraphis offering him unexpected encouragement, Elias began to feel like maybe he could build something here. He was more than just a human soldier. He was now part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. An empire that had changed in ways no one could have predicted. As Elias walked back toward the royal chambers that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future of Xipherion was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was ready to face it, alongside his wives and the challenges that awaited them. This was just the beginning, and Elias Drake was determined to prove that he was exactly what the Xipherian Empire needed. As the days turned into weeks, Elias Drake continued to adjust to his life in the Xipherian Empire. The challenges were unrelenting, but with every passing moment, he felt a little more like he truly belonged. His marriage to Princess Lyra, Princess Tyra and Princess Seraphis had transformed his life in ways he had never expected. It was no longer just about a human marrying into an alien empire. It was about creating a future together, one that was rooted in trust, unity, and change. The Council's changing view. The Sci-Fi Council, once a group of powerful individuals who had doubted Elias, was slowly but surely starting to see him in a different light. Lord Kale, the loudest critic of the marriage, had begun to soften his stance. The change was subtle, but Elias could feel it. One morning, as Elias sat in the Grand Council Hall for yet another meeting, the tension in the room felt different. The members who had once eyed him with suspicion now seemed to give him a respectful nod as he entered. Then Lord Kull, who used to look at him as though he were beneath his notice, greeted him with a small but noticeable gesture of acknowledgement. "I believe we have much to discuss," King Vorthen said as he motioned for Elias to sit at the table with the rest of the council. The meeting began, but something was different this time. There were fewer arguments about Elias' place within the empire. Lord Kale, though still cautious, refrained from making the usual sharp comments. Instead, he addressed the room, his voice calm but thoughtful. "Elias Drake has proven himself in ways that are not easy to dismiss. I admit, I had my doubts about his presence here, but perhaps the future of this empire is not just tied to our traditions, but also to the courage of those willing to embrace change." The other council members exchanged glances, and for the first time, Elias felt a sense of unity in the room. The council, which had once viewed him as an outsider, was beginning to accept that he was not just a human in their midst. He was a leader. Strength and unity. Later that day, Elias sat in the royal gardens with Princess Lyra, who had been his constant source of support. She had been by his side since the moment they met, offering guidance, comfort, and love in ways he hadn't expected from someone so different from him. "Do you think we're finally making progress?" Elias asked as he watched a pair of Zephyrian birds soar overhead. Lyra smiled, her silvery blue eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "I think we are. But it's not just about what others think of you, Elias. It's about what you believe in yourself. You've done more than prove your strength in the trials. You've shown your heart, and that's what matters most." Elias turned to face her, feeling a wave of gratitude. "But it's not just me, Lyra. It's all of us. You, Taxira, and Seraphis. Without your support, none of this would have been possible." Lyra's expression softened. "We're in this together, and I believe that, no matter the challenges, we'll find a way to make this work. For you, for me, and for all of Zephyrian." The conversation was simple, but it held a deep sense of meaning. Elias knew that it would take time, but he was starting to believe that he could truly make a difference, not just in his own life, but in the empire as a whole. Facing the threat. While the council seemed to be easing its opposition, a new threat loomed on the horizon. The Zephyrian Empire was vast, and with such an immense territory, there were always those who sought to challenge its strength. News had arrived that a rebellious faction from the outer provinces was growing in power. They rejected the idea of a human in the royal family and saw Elias as a symbol of everything they despised. One evening, a royal messenger arrived at the palace with urgent news. "A group of dissidents has gathered near the northern border, my king. They claim to have the support of several factions within the empire who still oppose the marriage." The messenger's face was grave as he delivered the message. King Vorthen's expression hardened. "We cannot allow this threat to grow. Elias, I need you to lead a diplomatic mission to calm tensions. Your presence could prevent further violence." Elias didn't hesitate. He had fought in the trial of strength, but this was a different kind of battle. It wasn't about fists or weapons. It was about words, understanding, and finding common ground. "I will do whatever I can, Your Majesty," Elias said firmly. Princess Zyra, who had been unusually quiet during the conversation, spoke up. "This is a dangerous mission, Elias. Are you sure you're prepared to face those who still see you as an enemy?" Elias nodded. I'm ready. If I can prove that I'm not just a human but a part of this empire, then perhaps the people will start to see things differently. Zera met his gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. You've already shown us that you're more than just a human. I believe in you. The journey begins. The following day, Elias, accompanied by Princess Lyra, Princess Seraphis, and a small contingent of soldiers, set out for the northern border. The journey would be long, and the risks were high, but Elias felt a sense of determination growing within him. He was no longer just an outsider trying to find his place. He was now an ambassador for change. As they traveled through the vast landscapes of Sci-Fi, Elias began to feel a deeper connection to the land itself. The forests, the mountains, the rivers, all of it was becoming a part of him. The empire, once so foreign to him, was starting to feel like home. That evening, as they set up camp, Princess Seraphis turned to Elias with a smile. "You're quiet tonight. Something on your mind?" Elias chuckled softly. "I've been thinking about what comes next. The council may be beginning to accept me, but the real challenge is the people. There are those who still see me as an outsider, and it's hard to change people's minds." Seraphis' playful grin softened. "You've already shown you can handle the hardest challenges. This is no different. You're a part of this empire now, Elias, and in time, the people will see that." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but also a sense of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but with his wives by his side, and with his belief in the empire's future, he was ready to face whatever came next. A future united. As they continued their journey toward the northern border, Elias couldn't help but feel that something was shifting within him. He had come to Zephyrian as a stranger, but now he was a part of something much greater. A union of people, cultures, and histories that could create a new future. The empire was at a crossroads, and the decisions made in the coming days would shape its future. Elias knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready to lead, to fight for the future of the Zephyrian Empire, and to prove that love, unity, and courage could overcome even the greatest of challenges. The dawn of a new era was approaching, and Elias was prepared to meet it head-on.